Southeast Asia ranks the top place in the world for crypto adoption. Here's why. We're speaking with Wei Zhou. He is the CEO of coins.ph, the largest crypto exchange in the Philippines, regulated by the Central Bank of the Philippines. Welcome to the show, Wei. Pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Very important topic that people don't quite understand is why Bitcoin and crypto adoption overall is more intense where you're based right now in the Philippines and the Southeast Asia region than perhaps in North America, Europe, and the West. We have different use cases that the audience should be aware of because this, I think, represents the future of crypto, at least from what I've seen from the data. Wait, before we get into that topic, I want to introduce you to the audience because this is your first time on the show. Now, I understand that prior to your acquisition of coins.ph, you were the former CFO of Binance. Tell us about your transition into the crypto industry, into Binance, and then into coins.ph.
Yeah, sure. So so Binance was kind of like my introduction to crypto and to blockchain. And then it was kind of like baptism by fire.
Okay.
I joined them in the summer of 2000, in late summer of 2018. As their CFO, but I think my role there was actually much more generic than just sort of like financial and accounting. It was actually much more focused on investment and global expansion. Worked with CZ and the team to I think land a lot of their fiat businesses, and also did several of the sort of significant deals when I was there. And I think my prior to sort of joining crypto in general, I was actually just and I was a CFO for I think 3 different startups, mostly based in Asia. I also sort of worked on a couple of acquisition deals, or actually worked on a significant sort of acquisition, leading a fund to basically buy out Grindr. So I kind of worked in the U.S. for a bit. But overall, sort of my experience, working experience has mostly been in Asia. And I think this is where not just interest, but I think from not just investment interest, but I think where actual use cases for crypto in the real world is actually being much more pervasive. I think in versus sort of the other parts of the world.
What inspired you to move from the largest exchange in the world to a localized exchange, the largest in the Philippines, but still servicing the Southeast Asia region? What did you see in the Philippines region that attracted you?
Yeah, I think Philippines is actually a really interesting country. I think if you look at sort of like, I mean, I think the coverage that I'm looking at, I think is just Southeast Asia in broader terms, but
Sure.
more specifically, I think the license that I left finance in the actually summer of 2021, so almost about a year, almost coming on a year and a half, coming on 2 years. And after I left, there's I was looking at, just generally what to do. I think one thing I was sort of 100% certain on was actually to stay in the industry, stay building, I think. And then, and I think, one of the things that I saw in terms of sort of like, just user base, global adoption perspective, like one comment that I kind of made is like, like maybe in the world, there's this many people that trade crypto. Right. And then maybe there's many people that sort of like look for yield, right? Yield seeking. That's where sort of that's sort of exchanging DeFi. And then in terms of number of people that actually like play games and do other things, it's probably like that big. Right. So and then sort of like at that point, Philippines was actually sort of the global leader in terms of the number of Web3 gamers in that country, with the success of Axie Infinity and other sort of smaller Web3 games that was being adopted. So sort of like I saw this like, really interesting trend in that that made Philippines sort of like, why did sort of Web3 game take off in the Philippines vis-a-vis sort of other countries? And I sort of noticed some really strong trends in the Philippines. First of all, Philippines is actually, one of the top 15 populous countries in the world with about 100 plus million people. And then the second thing is that most of the country is actually quite fluent in English. And more than half the population are actually under age of 30. And all that says is that it's basically got like the third largest, not counting like United States, or not counting United States, like behind sort of like India and Nigeria. It's got like the third largest, like youngest, English speaking population in the world.
Right.
Right. And it's not just sort of language, it's also culturally. given sort of like, the most popular sport there is actually basketball and not soccer, like other regions in Southeast Asia and the developing worlds. So there's actually trends from a cultural perspective, consumption perspective. It actually trends more North American. And at the same time, people, the GDP per capita is actually not at sort of the $10,000 level. It's still sort of sub 10,000 US dollars per year. It's like in the 5,000 to $8,000 range. So sort of like people are willing to do things or willing to take on tasks that allows them to basically earn amount of money that I think in the fully developed world it wouldn't do. So sort of it has, what I'm trying to say is that Philippines has a sort of all of these sort of it's like the cross section of this Venn diagram that kind of made it, very kind of like the right place, I think, for crypto adoption. So
Yep.
I think that sort of geographically, that was one of my choices. And then going back, yeah, sorry, I just paused. Sorry. And then the other thing that sort of made coins.ph really interesting is that it has pretty much all of the licenses that you need to conduct a regulated crypto exchange plus payment, plus remittance business. It's licensed by the central bank as a remittance company, as an FX dealing company, as a payment. It has actually a payment license. So you can actually do what Venmo does in the US. And it also has a cryptocurrency exchange. You can actually do what Coinbase does, like in the Philippines. So with all of these licenses, it was probably, and it's been around for a bit, and it's got an established user base and an established brand. So sort of, so in last year, in 2022, I basically worked with a buyout fund called Joffrey Partners, and we basically bought out coins from the previous shareholder Gojek, and we basically became controlling shareholders in the business. And I put myself and down and CEO to sort of officially take over and really hope to build coins into a crypto or Web3 powerhouse in not just the Philippines, but I think in Southeast Asia as a whole.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a $190 million deal, $200 million
I
deal.
did not disclose the amount, but something in that range, yeah.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Southeast Asian region of adoption.
Mhm.
And we like we discussed already, big Web3 gaming community. We're going to talk about that. I'm looking at the Chainalysis report, the 2022 Global Crypto Adoption Index, top 20. Vietnam number 1, Philippines number 2, Ukraine number 3. What's interesting is that, that in this index, in the top 20, 10 of them are lower middle income countries: Vietnam, Philippines, Ukraine, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Morocco, Nepal, Kenya, and Indonesia. Why are emerging markets dominating crypto adoption on a per capita basis?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think in addition to gaming, I think, in addition to sort of like, Bitcoin, right, whose biggest use case, I think, pretty popularly and pretty generally accepted as a storage of value use case. I think the second biggest use case for blockchain, I think globally, is actually the US dollar. You have $100 billion worth of US dollar stable coins in USDT, USDC, BUSD. And what that allows, I think it allows people in these countries that are either a combination of poor, not poor, but sort of, still developing or emerging, a combination of, maybe have economic uncertainty. In the case of Ukraine, you have like other types of uncertainty, right? In these kind of countries, people sort of still seek the safety of the US dollar. And I think the US dollar stablecoin provides that alternative, I think, to local currencies. And I think that's something that I think people in North America don't see, in that, commerce takes place cross-border, right? In the U.S., it's cross-state, and Canada is cross-provinces, but commerce in Southeast Asia, in South Asia and Africa, and it's still cross-border, right? The countries are generally, and you need some kind of currency to run that. And that's why I think the importance for coins is we're actually facilitating a lot of these remittances. Like if you look at the Philippines, it's the fourth biggest inward remittance taking. It's the fourth biggest remittance country in the world, right behind China, India, and Mexico, and the fourth largest Philippine. And every year is about $40 to $50 billion coming home from the overseas workers, right? And that they're getting charged, I don't know how much, anywhere between 3 to 5 to 10% in terms of the cost of sending that money, right? And that's just one use case that we think crypto and blockchain can be a better solution for. I think then a lot of the existing rails that's running, right? And I think if you take in sort of like cross-border commerce, that's even a bigger use case that could potentially, we can use stable coins, for. And I think that's one use case. The other use case, obviously, if you look at is actually gaming. I think people look for, cheap forms of entertainment, and there's no cheaper form of entertainment than basically mobile games, right? And other types of sort of social games and MMORPG games. And with these kind of games, if you have this environment where NFT comes into place, where you can actually earn value as you play a game, right? And I think that model is still being refined, but just sort of like one small use case, like one small game, right? And like compared to sort of the bigger gaming world, has already driven 10, 20 million people sort of to come into crypto to basically play games, right? And I think that's where two of the bigger use cases that I see in these regions that I think people in North America probably don't see.
Okay. Is there a correlation between the number of bank accounts per capita and crypto adoption, or inverse correlation?
I probably like uh less banking access, probably more adoption, I would say.
Yeah.
Right? Just because, crypto may be a faster, because if you think about it, like what people with money, right? You got to store it somewhere, right? And you have to invest it and you have to seek yield on it and return on it. And I think, one comment that I kind of make is that, investing in tokens, right? Or basically you're just investing in early stage startups, right? And some larger potential infrastructure that you see, right? In Bitcoin or Ethereum or some of the other layer ones and potentially even layer twos. Like those are actually fundamental infrastructure plays, on the future of technology, right? I think that before, 10 years ago, before, crypto, these kind of opportunities did not exist. Like nobody could invest in early stages of like, Google, Amazon, or even Netflix, right? Or even other gaming companies like Tencent or whatever, right? You can't only
Yeah.
VCs, but now I think just average, retail investors, with the right infrastructure can actually access those kind of investments. I think that's more on the crypto token side. But in terms of like, the unbanked, I'm a little bit hesitant to sort of like to put sort of like to comment on that. Just I haven't seen the data, but
Right.
also I think with banking, like if you look at the U.S., right, still one of the more popular crypto adoption countries, still the
Yeah. Number
biggest.
5.
Yeah, it's still and it's fully banked, right? You have very and it's sort of like maybe, and then if you look at sort of like Singapore or Hong Kong, crypto adoption in those countries are quite high. I think you have to sort of if you can't just sort of look at bank accounts, banking access. I think you have
Right.
to also you have to look at banking access plus say like I think GDP per capita. I think those are some of the more key numbers. Yep.
And I think going back to gaming for a minute, people have to understand it's important to note that these Web3 games actually earn you money when you play them. If if you play and do well and earn win and whatnot, you earn through cryptos, or in-game tokens or native tokens or perhaps another token in another ecosystem. But the point is, it's a source of income for some people in Southeast Asia. I've read reports that some doctors in Vietnam are making more money playing video games and Web3 games than their actual job being a doctor. Not all, of
Yeah.
course, this is an
Yeah, I mean, I
exception,
think
but yeah.
like the phenomenon kind of existed, I think, the second half of 2021. I think
Okay.
sort of as sort of token prices came down in 2022, you can't really make a living, I think, playing games.
Okay.
But you can't, but I think the proof of concept there is that you can actually do something outside of your job, like playing games and earn money, right? Whether that's like, in a bull market, maybe that's $500 a month. In a bear market, maybe that's like $5 a month. But that opportunity to earn that $5 a month didn't exist before, right? And now it exists,
Right.
to do something that you're going to be doing on your phone anyways, which is basically, spend your spare time playing some casual games. And I think skill play games is the next big thing. I think that's going to come out. I think most of the games previously that were successful were focused more on, I think, like NFT, bit breeding type of games. But I do think that more skill based type of gameplay is coming, and that will drive, I think, real earnings.
I want to talk about the point that coins.ph is licensed by the central bank of the Philippines. This is not something that we see on other exchanges around the world, right? Can you tell us what exactly this means and why that's different from something that's not licensed by a central bank?
Yeah, so different countries have different regulators
Hmm.
for cryptocurrency for well, I think the general term that people use that sort of the industry use now is VAS, virtual asset service providers. I think like and it just that it so happens in the Philippines, the BSP, the central bank, is the regulator that hands out VASP licenses. I think in Thailand it's the SEC, right? In Indonesia in Singapore it's the MAS, right? Different countries have different regulators. In Japan, I think it's the JFSA, right? And I think in the US, you basically see this thing of just like, who is the regulator, right? Is it is it the securities regulators? Is it the commodities regulators? And in Indonesia right now, it's the commodity regulators that's kind of regulating it. It's just that I think in different countries, different. I think in the Philippines, the central bank is the most respected, is the more, regulatory authority. We
Right.
also communicate with the SEC as well on sort of on certain trading practices and listing anything that touches on securities. But it just so happens right now the licensing regime is the BSP. What's interesting about that is I think it focuses on sort of the original concerns I think that industry and regulators have had about crypto, which is basically how do we counter money laundering, how do we counter other types of illicit activities that take place. I think that could take place, via sort of crypto rails, and I think that's something that we've been sort of focused on and have been sort of working with our regulators on from day one. So I think what you're seeing is sort of the evolution. I think of also evolution. I think of crypto regulation. Early focus is basically anti-money laundering. I think what you've seen this year or 2021 is basically you're going to see a bigger focus on custody, right? Which is basically, service providers needs to provide full custody, right? Or one-for-one custody of user assets. I mean, but we've had that at Coins from day one, right? Given that our regulators are the same way regulate banks, how you custody your customer assets is a core focus of what we focus on, of what we do, and also part of our regulation. And I think the third leg of sort of crypto regulation is basically, what can you list, what can you trade, right? And that comes down to security token, the nature of the tokens, right? Whether it has security like status or it has actually doesn't look and act like a security at all. And I think the fourth leg that's going to come, I think, is more on trading practices,
Hmm.
right? Do you have insiders trading on your exchange? How do you like? And then that looks more like traditional stock, market manipulation stuff, insider trading stuff. I think all of these things are taking place, but at least I think I actually think like the framework for regulating crypto exchanges is actually fairly straightforward. And we already have sort of some of these regimes in Philippines already. And so for me, crypto regulation, like one example that I kind of like, it's kind of like almost like a petri dish right now. It's like different countries have different regulators, right? Like I
Right.
mentioned before, you have security regulators, commodity regulators, the central bank, or just like an all-in, financial regulator like you have in Singapore and Japan. At the same time, you also have different type of focuses, right? I think in certain countries, the original focus, if it's a security regulator, then they're concerned maybe more about security versus utility. If it's a banking regulator, then it's more focused on money laundering, and other. So I think it's just you're already seeing different laws taking place in different countries, and then you're seeing the reaction of that kind of in the real world. So so for
Well, I
me, it's just
noticed.
like yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that coins.ph doesn't list thousands of altcoins, and I know that's for a regulatory reason, right? You're just, I believe you're not allowed. Can you shed some light as to why the regulators in the Philippines only allowed the exchanges to list the largest ones?
Yeah, there are no restrictions on there are certain conditions on what we can and cannot list,
Hmm.
right? So for coins, it's more of a just sort of an infrastructure. Like one of the
Okay.
reasons I bought the business and became CEO is I actually see a lot of potential to making certain like assets becoming more available. I think the previous owners and the operators didn't really focus on at making more tokens available, and part of that is actually supporting more networks, right? Supporting like one of the some of the things that we have in the pipeline is actually adding support for more layer ones and layer two chains. And I think that's something that I think prior to in 2021 when we're looking at coin or 2022 when we're looking at coins, they only have about 10 tokens listed. I think we've added about 15 more last year, and we're looking to add more. But I think given that you run a smaller regional exchange, vis-a-vis sort of some of these larger global exchanges. I think the selection of tokens will just be, probably larger. But I think it's different trade-offs. I think
Right.
the
One
amount
more.
of protection, yeah, the amount of protection you get on trading on a regular exchange is very different. Yeah.
One more question on exchanges. We'll move on to the
Mhm.
topic. Following the collapse of FTX, a big theme is the loss of trust of centralized exchanges. Can you present a case as to why we still need a centralized exchange and why the consumer can benefit from a centralized exchange rather than everyone just using a DEX?
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of put centralized exchanges in two buckets. I think one
Okay.
is what I call regulated exchanges. Like we are a single jurisdiction regulated exchange, right? Regulated by basically the most, the biggest, like by a real regulator, right, in a real country, right? And I think that's
But
really
well,
important.
why
Versus
do you
sort of
think exchanges in the U.S. are not I mean, they could be regulated by the
in the
SEC, but
U.S.
it's
In the
not.
U.S. I think that's sort of like the lack of clarity in the U.S. right now,
Right.
right? Where there's no single regulator that regulates cryptocurrency exchanges. In the U.S., you basically have to get either. I think the way to start a license, the way to start an exchange in the U.S. is kind of like you get a MSB central with FinCEN, which is a Treasury Department, and you basically get MTLs. From different states, then you can basically start trading. You don't need permission from CFTC or SEC to start a cryptocurrency exchange in the United States right now. I think that's what drives at sort of like, and there's no clear law. Like in the Philippines, there's a vast law that's actually adopted and regulated and enforced by the central bank, right? In Singapore, MAS has very clear digital payment act that licenses and regulates cryptocurrency businesses, both in payment and in trading. And the same is true, I think, in Thailand and Indonesia. And that's why if you look at FTX didn't have that many users in the Philippines, right? Just because the users in the Philippines probably have better alternatives to basically trading, right? So it
Yeah.
wasn't really hit by sort of the FT. Our users in the Philippines wasn't really hit by the FTX, scandal that much. I think the problem with FTX and some of these other sort of offshore exchanges is that they don't have a single regulator that they have to answer to. Therefore, you basically have different jurisdictions that you run around in. But when the proverbial shit hits the fan, who do you go to as a consumer to basically get your money back, right?
The US has
And
some of the most stringent regulations for financial products in the world, but why are they lagging behind when it comes to crypto regulation?
I think it's just I can't comment on that. I don't have any foresight in terms of sort of what's
Okay.
going on in the US. I think, the political situation there in terms of, like the Democrats and the Republicans,
Yeah, there's this
plus
turf war, CFTC
lobby
versus SEC. Yeah.
lobbying interest in different parties. I think there's definitely pressure to act in the US right now. I just hope they don't overreact.
Hmm.
That's actually going to push, but irregardless of what happens in the US, I do know that, like in Asia, at least, we have in each country you have actually fairly, because I think to run a cryptocurrency exchange, right? Like going back to your question about, why does the world still need centralized exchanges?
Yes.
Because it's much easier, I think, for users to
Right.
use versus DEXs.
Right.
At the end of the day, like people, like humans, we've been trained by banks for the last
Sure.
150 years. Right? Imagine when banks first started, right? Banks was the replacement for like your mattress, right? Or or in-home safe, right? But even in the early stages of banks, there's a lot of kinks, a lot of regulation, things that kind of got worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that things that got worked out, and at the same time, people started trusting sort of banks, right? Because there's protection, right? And I think the same should be the case. I think for crypto exchanges, because you are like at the end of the day, you are storing things of value with a third party, right? Like anytime you're taking things of value, there needs to be actually very strict regulation about the custody of someone that provides custody of that thing of that money, right? That's why I think for us, I believe in that regulation is actually really important, I think, to provide that sense of trust, I think, for the user, and for consumers that have been generally used to or have already adopted this mindset with sort of using third parties to hold custody over their money and to
Okay.
trade in those kind of situations. So I think just from an ease of use perspective, centralized exchanges are better. I think with the right regulation, I think centralized exchanges, should provide better. But there's a still contingent. There's still, not your keys, not your money, right? I think what decentralized, provides is that provides you an alternative, I think, to the
Yes.
centralized. And I think that doesn't change. And I think,
Yes.
it's just that to get sort of this massive hockey stick growth, I think you still need centralized services.
Finally, I'll ask you a more philosophical question. There's this concept called hyper-Bitcoinization, which is the scenario in which Bitcoin becomes bigger than fiat. We use Bitcoin for most of our everyday life and transactions versus fiat money. We're not there yet, of course, but suppose we get there. What is the use case of Bitcoin in this scenario, in this hypothetical scenario? What is the on-ramp towards getting there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll call it almost like hyper tokenization vis-a-vis sort of hyper Bitcoinization.
Okay.
Because I think there's going to be, I think Bitcoin, until sort of like its value can stabilize, sort of around a certain thing. But if it stabilizes, then it sort of like all the other sort of, thesis of Bitcoin goes away, in that it needs to be a value of exchange. Right. Like I said before, like when we're signing a deal for $10, we need to know, or, even if it's denominated in pesos or in Sing dollars or or Thai baht, whatever the value that we sign exchange in, like both sides needs to sort of have some kind of an agreement that this is the value of exchange. Right. And I think with sort of the fluctuation in price and the volatility in price of Bitcoin, it will be really hard for Bitcoin to act as a value of exchange. Right, just because of the volatility in its price, and that which provides sort of like the other use case of Bitcoin, which is like storage of value and increase in the value that you hold, right? So I think that sort of like that actually conflicts, and until sort of someday that conflicts gets resolved, then it's really hard. But I think other types of tokens can provide that use case. Right. And I think you're seeing that now with sort of like, CDBCs, which essentially are just going to be stable coins that's denominated in local currencies. I think more and more, you're going to see more and more sort of stable coin like type of tokens, that sort of like firm up, the value of exchange, in different countries. I think that's when you get more tokenization, and when you get sort of like, like large scale tokenization, even if it's a tokenization of a type of fiat, you're going to get more users, more adoption, I think, of tokens in general. And I think that's just going to drive value, I think, to the sort of, I would say, the mainstream tokens like Bitcoin, and more use cases in terms of like, not just centralized wallets but decentralized wallets. Because I think once you go down that rabbit hole of actually using tokens as a value of exchange, using tokens in day to day, you're just going to realize that, hey, this is just better. Like one of the mission that we have at Coins is how do we drive, value transfer from T plus 3 plus 5%, or T plus 5 to 5% to T plus 0 at T plus 0 plus 0, right? Which is like, how do we drive, which kind of exists in crypto today, and pretty close, right? You can actually send money with almost instant settlement and almost like zero fees, right? T plus 0 plus 0. I think once you start using token, you realize you can actually, transfer things, very different from banks, very different from other types of, payment providers. Then you're gonna that's when sort of the aha moment happens, and you're gonna start moving more of your transactions into tokens, into crypto.
Okay. Wei, very interesting discussion. Welcome to the show, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, guys.
And thank you for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lin. Stay tuned.